Well, it's not as frustrating as I thought it was going to be. Severance season 2. So, I really liked the first season. I had some points of frustration, namely the emergence of the romantic entanglement between Heliar and Mark S. I didn't like it. Like, as far as I was concerned, it came out of nowhere. I know some people in my comments argued that it had been building. I didn't see it. Um, and even if I had seen it, I wouldn't have wanted it. Like I didn't find that to be an interesting aspect of what they were doing. I didn't feel it particularly fit the overall themes in terms of corporatism and office work and the detachment. I'm not going to say it had nothing to do with the themes, but it felt forced to me. It felt like an ill fit. And I don't feel that much different now. They did a couple of things with that specifically that were almost something for me, but overall, this season does what I was afraid it would do, which is focus more on the plot at the loss of the themes. Now, I don't know if I should, how much I need to explain that. The themes of isolation, of detachment from your job, of being used by a corporate entity, about corporate cultism and all this other stuff. These things that are baked into the premise and were there very strongly in season 1 are not gone. And also, thankfully, they're not undermined because, we don't need another Arcane season 2 where they completely 100% undermined the class struggle theme they didn't even realize they'd done, evidently, from what I'm hearing. But anyway, moving on from that. They don't undermine the themes, but they do kind of take a back seat to logistics, to the plot about how to get out Gemma, how to get out outie Mark's wife. And, a lot of stuff centers around that, cycles around it. I think we see more of the outside world than I think was necessary for the thematics. But even as it does that, there are some things that I'm like, okay, see that? There you go. It's like, I feel like a decent example is the episode focusing on Miss Cobell, on Harmony, when she goes to the town that she grew up in, which has been left devastated because it used to be dependent on a branch of Lumen that doesn't exist anymore, making a product that is harmful, and the whole town is hooked. I believe it was ether. But she goes back there, and like that whole depiction, I didn't need. I felt that added not a lot. I think that hit themes of discarding the workforce, of not caring for the people who actually, make anything. I feel like that was stuff covered better by other elements of the show. That having all been said, when we got to the end and found out that Harmony was the creator, the designer, the person who came up with Severance and basically every major aspect of it, that felt like it fit the themes. That felt like it mattered because that's what corporations do. They take the work of other people, people who think of this stuff, people who make this stuff. They claim it as their own. They say that this is ours. We made this. And if you are if you are lucky, they'll let you continue to work for the company as they milk far more out of your creation than they will ever reward you with. That, as an aspect, that fit. But that came at the very end of an episode with a whole bunch of other stuff that didn't feel like it was contributing a whole lot. Again, not necessarily taking away from what there was, but not contributing a heck of a lot. Overall, I'd say I'm most torn about the stuff with Mark, Gemma, and Harmony. Not fully disliking any of it, but that's the stuff that gets a fair bit of play and that I'm the most torn on. A lot of the other stuff is still pretty solid, at least in decent chunks. What's going on with Dylan and the relationship he develops with his Audie's wife and how his Audie reacts to that when he finds out is all really interesting. And that might be the stuff that does the least to add to the theming that I still really liked. Just because I thought it was an interesting dynamic and it was an interesting thing to address, and I thought was far more interesting than the twisted love triangle that they were doing with the three people who I mentioned I was mixed on. With Irving and with Bert, that felt a little bit like we have to just tie this off, but at the same time, it lent enough on what had been built up before that it still felt impactful. And also just what perfect use of Christopher Walken. Because like Christopher Walken has been adorable in this show, but I know he can be chilling. But yet, because I'd spent a whole season with him being adorable, I wasn't prepared for when they had those darker moments where he's like in half shadow and be like, let's go for a ride. I'm like, right. That's right. You can be creepy. So like that was just real good use of Christopher Walken. And also like some of the ideas are interesting and it felt very complete with him. In terms of the story that they were telling, because initially when the idea like gets introduced at that dinner, I'm just talking the whole thing and talking spoilers if you hadn't figured that out already. When he's at the dinner and there's this whole thing of like, well, our church said that innies have a soul and Bert is definitely going to hell, but his innie will be innocent. I did find myself tilting my head like, why though? Why are you so certain he's going to hell? But then we find out more about what he did for Lumen before becoming severed and working for them in a different way. And it brings a satisfying answer to the questions the story itself raises. So I feel like his stuff was really good. Another thing I liked about Dylan's story was that I had been left with the question at the end of the previous season, like, okay, I get why Mark's doing this for sure. I get why Helly's doing this. I think I kind of get why Irving's doing this. I don't get why Dylan is. But we get a satisfying answer to that as we get a sense of just his awkwardness and his inability to fit in. And that said, like there was one moment that I would have liked to have seen handled just slightly differently. When he's in for the interview with the door manufacturer, when they bring up him being severed and it just turns into flat out prejudice, like, oh, we don't like severed here. Like that, what I think was right in front of them and would have been a lot more interesting was if he'd said, oh, you've been working as severed for a while now. See, we can't count that as job experience because you don't remember doing any of it. So, you know, this reads like a massive gap in your employment history, and that, I don't know if we can work with that. I think that would have been a way more interesting way to go with it instead of just like severed, abomination. Well, he didn't go that far, but like that was the feel of it, which just it was the cheapest way they could have had that kind of thing play out. Milchick. Milchick might be my favorite character on this show. He is really good, and there's some really wonderful moments, and I came to appreciate it was late in the season that I came to properly appreciate this. But the fact that you have a bunch of white people telling a black guy who's putting in the work that he's using words that are too big and they want him to talk smaller and dumber. Oh boy. And then stuff like him talking to the animatronic. I can't help but wonder, would this animatronic be digging this hard into a white floor manager? Like if it was still Harmony, would this animatronic of Kier be just sniping at her as hard as it is Milchick? I'm not sure it would. And it doesn't like go too far down the road of that, but like by the time the season was done, I felt the impact of him being, I think, the only black person working there. The only unsevered black person, because there is I forget her name now, who was in Innie, who we saw a little bit this season. We saw more of her last season, but like in terms of the unsevered folks, he's the only one I can remember. He's certainly the only prominent one, and he is definitely surrounded by white people. And there were a lot of things that probably were there in the first season too that I picked up a little bit more here, like a lot of microaggression stuff. And I probably missed a ton, but I was like, ooh, and like seeing him push back in small ways now and then. That felt, and it never made me like rooting for him in the sense of I want him to win, like still like bad dude, but it felt good. It felt satisfying. So I was here for that. I liked that. Overall, the stuff with Harmony, other than that one detail that I mentioned, like she is a character that I think the show finds way more interesting than I do. Like, she feels like one of those characters largely built out of mysteries. Where her behavior is a little hard to explain sometimes, especially in the first season. And so you're like, okay, I guess I kind of want to know what your deal is a little bit more. And then it's like, oh, and she's his neighbor and keeping an eye on him. Okay, I guess I'm kind of curious as to why she's doing that. And, this level of devotion that she has, but also she's not always listening to orders. Like, I feel like the main draw for her was like, don't you want to find out why? And the thing was, I didn't care why. By the time we were done with this season. And I kind of even got some answers. I still didn't really care why. And it's not the performance. Patricia Arquette, I think, does a good job. The show finds her way more interesting than I do. I think is the short version of that. How satisfying was it to watch Gwendoline Christie, her character, beat the ever-loving hell out of Drummond? Oh, that felt good. That felt really good. And then when Mark kills him accidentally, at first I was like, oh, that's a very Ben Stiller kind of dark joke thing. But then it ends up being a logistical thing because it's his blood that gets Mark into the room to retrieve Gemma. I'm like, oh, okay. There was actually like a decent plot reason to do that, and you just took the opportunity to have it be a black joke. That's the balance I like to see. But coming back to Helly and Mark, and that stuff. So again, I just didn't find the romantic connection interesting. I think the most interesting thing they did not take proper advantage of, because the idea that Helly was her outie pretending to be her innie really opened up a possibility to explore a different kind of intra-office paranoia, because competition between departments is a very common thing that a lot of corporations like to do to varying degrees, because if you are focused on being better than another department or competing with another department, then you're not thinking as a whole and working together and going, oh wait, we're not in competition, we're just being screwed over by the people up top. So competitiveness between departments is a thing, and they illustrated that very well in the first season in an exaggerated sci-fi way. What they had the opportunity to do with Helly and revealing that she was actually her outie was they could have really dug into the idea of snitches, of people who, it's not even a different department, people who are working among you who will happily report you to the higher ups and throw you under the bus, and you don't realize they're doing that. And then when you realize that there are people doing that within your department, the paranoia that sets in and the distancing that happens between even people who are sitting right next to each other. That was something I was really hoping the show would explore, and it kind of doesn't. It doesn't. It mainly functionally just becomes a means of removing Irving from the department. And it doesn't really hold much more than that. Also, I'm in favor of plenty of exaggeration, for the sake of making the point a little bit harder, especially in a sci-fi or fantasy setting where it's allegorical the way a lot of this is. That having been said, something about the way that Jamie Egan was depicted, it felt like this feels like a little much. It felt like a parody of a parody. You know what I mean? I don't think he needed to be that weird in terms of both this very vacant expression and then the way he talked and then the things that he said. And okay, can we dial back one of these? Because this is weird on weird on weird. You put a hat on a hat. It's a little bit more than I need. But then again, he wasn't around too much, so it wasn't that big an issue. But yeah, the main thing is I just found the whole conflict, there wasn't even that much conflict as it built up, but the whole connection between Helly and Mark and how that impacts the Innie's desire to want to help the outie. Like, I mean, that's not fully uninteresting. Like, the interesting part of that to me was Mark arguing with himself, like trying to convince his Innie to help, and his Innie making some really good points. And again, in an exaggerated sci-fi way, like Mark making the point that, like, look, this is still my life. And just because you think it sucks doesn't mean I don't want it. There's a phrase that came to mind from one of my favorite Broadway musicals, Next to Normal. And the line is, you don't have to be happy at all to be happy you're alive. So, like, him making those points, and also within the greater allegory of, you know, corporatism and office work and stuff like that, like, it might suck and there might be a heavy detachment between your home life and your work life, but you are still building something there. As the Innie puts it, like, we find ways to have fulfillment. You make connections, you make friends, and it is a loss when that's gone. It's not the same as dying, again, exaggerated for the purposes of sci-fi, but like when you leave or you're fired or you're laid off or you're transferred, what life you'd built there, what fulfillment you were getting there is gone, and that is a loss. Maybe it's one worth taking, but it's not nothing. So that was, I think, the best thing that came out of the entire dynamic going on there. But it really was kind of just that scene in the end. And the rest of it, again, like, it's not badly done. And I'm sure for some people, I'm sure for some people it like was really intense and it drew them in. So I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying it's not what I wanted. And that's often I try and clarify as best to my ability when I'm talking about something that is not to my taste versus something that I think is just a bad choice or a choice that undermines something. So I don't like to use the phrase objectively bad, because boy, is that a phrase that gets abused in online criticism. But there is a difference between stuff like, I'm like, that's just a bad idea, and stuff where it's like, I would rather you'd have done something else because of my preferences. I try and distinguish that. And I don't think there's very much here that I would say, like, that's just wrong. Because again, they thankfully don't undermine any of their themes, at least not that I spotted. But they do a lot less intensive theme work in this season than they did the first season. And they pinned a lot on, like, this, oh, it's Cold Harbor. Ooh, what's that? And like, I didn't care. I'm going to end up doing a video on the main channel either later this month or next month talking about the need to make mysteries meaningful. And it's not enough just to have a mystery exist. And I'll probably end up citing Severance as an example. Not the most egregious, not by far. Doctor Who, in some instances, has been the most egregious. But I need some other examples than just that. I'll probably end up citing Severance amongst a few other things. And the mystery aspects, you know, the what are they doing, and the one other thing that I think was worth having there, and this kind of like cycles back to something I said. You know how I said I thought the destruction of the town that Harmony grew up in was a point made better elsewhere. Well, that includes towards the end where it's really made clear, once Lumen gets what it wants out of the people on the severed floor, you'll be done. They'll just get rid of you. Now, it's the heightened sci-fi thing where for the case of the people on the severed floor, for the Innies, that means they will be dead effectively. But it does reflect real corporate structure and mentality. Once you've gotten what you want out of employees, if you don't think you're going to get more than you are paying to have them in the situation that they're in, you just cut them. Oh, but we did the assignment. We did what you wanted. We accomplished the goal. Yes, you did. And we thank you for your service. Here's your pink slip. That's real. That's incredibly real. So there's enough good stuff in here that I will try to come back if and when a third season happens. but it's not as good as season 1. Season 1 had a tighter focus on the aspects that I, for one, as a viewer, prefer. But I did not dislike this nearly as much as I was afraid I was going to. Which, I guess for me, counts as a compliment. Severance Season 2. What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. Those all help me out. Oh, the whole thing with the replacement team at the front end, that just felt like wheel spinning. That felt like stuff to have. That felt like all moments to have for the trailer. And like, again, nothing wrong with the performers, but like everything from Miss Huang to the other 3 that were just in, that felt like that was there just so they could load up the trailer with them. Anyways, don't worry too much about it. We try and take a relaxed attitude around here, so come on back next time you need a break. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Zubin Lopfula, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Bluhuvian, Adam RDL Taylor, Pal Barabajagal, Mary Mello, Mira G, Sir Didymus is my favorite. I've never screwed that one up before. Well, if you want to hear me mess up your name, check out the rewards on the Patreon. I'm going to blame you.